Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Joe Patrick on Football. My name is Joe Patrick. I'm the Falcons insider. I've been covering the team since 2022 for the radio station, and we have a lot to talk about as another week of training camp has begun at Flowery Branch this week ahead of the first preseason game coming up on Friday against the Detroit Lions at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Before we get into everything there is to talk about, and there's a lot to talk about, first of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has engaged with the show, whether you're just a watcher or a listener on the podcast version. If you've chatted in the comments, whatever it's been, the response from you guys to this show has been incredible. We're just getting started. We're still trying to figure some things out, but I really just want to say how thankful I am for everybody who has liked the content that we're putting out, or even if you haven't liked the content we're putting out, I'm glad you're voicing your opinion on it. And, we'll continue to get some guests on in the future. Some of the guests that you've seen might come back from time to time. I'm sure we'll just rotate through. But obviously, if there's enough to talk about for myself, like there is today with training camp going on, it's just going to be me because we got to get through some of these things. So let's first of all get to the big news of the day, which actually came at the very end. I like to say we're Tarantinoing this thing. I forget what comedian initially made that joke, but it was the last thing that happened today. Maybe the biggest news item: Kaleb McGary signing his contract extension with the team. The starting right tackle will be here for another 2 years for $30 million over the next 2 years, not including this year. So he will be with the team basically for 3 more seasons at the very least. And it's a great deal, I think, for the Falcons, for McGary. And it's frankly one that I guess, a little surprised hadn't gotten done yet. But, even going into his contract year, McGary showed up. He was obviously absent from the team during the offseason. We talked about it on the show, but we talked to him earlier in training camp. He talked about how he had a procedure on his ankle to clean up some bone spurs. So that was the reason for that. And he said that he's feeling, because of those procedures, he's feeling as good as he has in several years. And I did find it was funny. His quote from when we talked to him, this was after the first day of training camp a couple of weeks ago. He said, quote, "You'll never find somebody more willing to be paid in all your life. Trust me." That was his response to Mark Raimondi, actually, who asked him about his contract situation. And now that contract situation is resolved. And it makes sense, again, for the Falcons and for McGary, in my opinion. First of all, I think for both sides, there's a continuity reason why you would want to get this done. And I think that, at just $15 million per year, I don't want to say I'm always hesitant to say there's hometown discounts necessarily because players are, and their agents, the association in general wants players to look out for, the most money they can get paid. But ultimately in this case, I think it makes sense for McGary to use this platform that he has with the Atlanta Falcons, with Dwayne Ledford in his run scheme, very much matching what Kaleb McGary is good at. And, he's got teammates that he really likes and respects, and Chris Lindstrom, Jake Matthews, Ryan Newsel, Matthew Bergeron. I mean, it is a very kind of tight-knit group. It's a group that has a lot of that continuity. And I think for that reason, it makes a lot of sense for the Falcons to just keep this thing rolling. I think obviously for the Falcons, you do have to look down the line toward maybe you want to go towards more of a traditional pass protecting tackle, which Kaleb McGary certainly is not. That's not the strength of his game. But I think that in this sense, you have continuity there. You know what you're getting out of the player, and it just makes sense for that reason. Again, he's a force in the run game. He's clearly an asset there. And if you can get the pass protection sorted out, whether that's through help against certain guys that he needs help against, and I don't think he needs help against every single edge rusher that he goes up against, but it's clear that he struggles against some certain a certain type of edge rusher, that kind of speed rusher. You need to give him some help there. You can do that. He's certainly going to give up a sack or 2 or 3, like it's just going to happen. It's one of those things. But ultimately, I think for the price that you're paying, it certainly makes a lot of sense. And one of the reasons why they probably couldn't, look to, upgrade on the pass protection at that position at this point in time is they just don't have the assets to really do that. They don't have a first round pick next year because they've already obviously traded that to the Rams. That got them James Pierce Jr. in the most recent draft. And that is typically where you're going to acquire your long-term pass protecting tackles. Those players just don't really appear that often on the free agent market. And I mean, this deal is a perfect, example of why these types of players don't hit the free agent market, because when you do have valuable players in the role, the teams are going to want to keep them in most circumstances, especially if you don't have that first round pick, if you can't kind of plan on that. So he's going to be here for, again, most likely 2 more years after this current year, so like 3 more seasons, and that gives, I think, the Falcons plenty of runway to kind of figure out the situation and how they want to go about acquiring ultimately who will be the successor there, and potentially the successor at the left tackle spot with Jake Matthews. Although I think, both of these players have, probably a bunch of years left. Jake Matthews has people think about him as kind of being at the end of his career. The guy has kept such good care of his body. If he doesn't suffer some sort of catastrophic injury, which he hasn't, obviously he's like this team's Iron Man, then, I don't think the Falcons are even thinking about that. And they just extended him as well this offseason to a long-term deal. So good news for the Falcons, kind of getting their offensive line sorted, getting that taken care of for a very, in my opinion, team-friendly deal. I think probably a good reason why Kaleb McGary would want to take that team-friendly deal. And also the fact that this team runs a pistol offense, I think that also just kind of gives them a little bit more security in having a player like Kaleb McGary protecting the quote-unquote blind side for Michael Penix, because from that vantage point that he has in the pocket, when the team's lined up in the pistol, he has a better idea of what's around him there. So that's the biggest news of the day. Maybe the second biggest news was, before practice, Raheem Morris told media that neither Michael Penix nor Kirk Cousins would be playing in the team's preseason game this Friday against the Lions, the aforementioned preseason game. No surprise to me. I mean, I thought that Raheem Morris pretty much telegraphed this as clearly as I think he could have, without coming out and saying on the first day of training camp that the starting quarterbacks weren't going to be playing in preseason. And I don't know if neither of these guys won't play the entirety of preseason, but certainly for this first game, I'm not surprised that he's resting them after what he said in that initial press conference, whenever it was, about 2 weeks ago, a little over 2 weeks ago, maybe. Basically saying that, the philosophy has not changed on what they did last year in preseason. And last year in preseason, even Michael Penix, a rookie quarterback who you think would be kind of ideally situated to take a bunch of preseason snaps, considering your starter Kirk Cousins at that point wasn't going to be playing. Even then, Michael Penix only had a couple series the entire preseason. He hardly got any snaps, and that was just, they wanted to protect their guy. And, they suffered 2 season-ending injuries in preseason games as well last year with between DeMarco Hellams and Braylon Trice. So no surprise there, but Raheem Morris did kind of firm that up for us earlier today. Now let's get into what happened at practice at Flowery Branch today. It was an interesting one. I mean, if you guys saw, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the conditions on display. Yeah, you probably didn't even need to see that, considering a lot of you probably live here and were experiencing the unseasonably cold temperatures, but it was more the wind and the rain, obviously, that was made for just nasty conditions for these players to play in today. And I kind of joked before practice that it was a very Spokane private workout kind of day, going back to this kind of almost mythology that's surrounding Michael Penix and the workout that he had when the Falcons executives went out there and the coaching staff went out there to work him out, and the conditions were nasty, and they were going to basically offer up to just cancel the whole thing. They only need to put him out there, and he went out and dazzled them with his ability to throw in that kind of weather. And what did we see today? We saw that exact same thing on display today. I mean, Michael Penix, I thought, was great, especially I mean, he was really good regardless of the conditions. Just I think again, I don't keep the quarterback stats. I want to check Mark Raimondi's notes. I believe he had him at 12 of 15. So he had him at 12 of 15. And that is in this kind of nasty, misty rain. The ball was wet. It wasn't super windy, but there was a breeze going throughout the day, and it didn't seem to matter to Michael Penix at all. It certainly did matter to Raheem Morris. I don't know. I'm sure you guys have also seen this clip somewhere, but I know the one that the video that I took the NFL got it and was posting it around. So that was kind of fun for me personally. But yeah, Raheem Morris got absolutely beaten, run over by by Drake London, who Raheem Morris. I mean, you got to have more veteran experience than to be going out on some slick, rainy, wet grass in some Jordans against maybe the best press beater in the NFL, especially someone who's going to do it in a physical way against Drake London. Drake London runs a little quick slant and just shoves Raheem Morris back, puts him on his butt, and then runs the slant. I know a lot of people were kind of criticizing Drake for not catching the pass at the end of that. I think it's worth noting that if you go back and watch, like, he knocks him back, and I don't think Drake realized he was gonna be able to like literally knock Raheem Morris on his ass. And he kind of, after he does that, I think he was like, "Oh crap!" He like kind of like hesitates and almost like leans down, like he was gonna pick up Morris or like tend to him for a second, but then obviously he realizes he has to run the route, so then he makes the cut. And at that point, it's a quick slant, so Michael Penix is just firing in there. And I would actually say, just given what happened, ball was actually kind of on the money, because Drake ends up having to kind of reach out for it because he is late out of his break because of what happened. And can't come down with it one-handed. So I don't fault Drake London for not catching that ball. He did get back in line and run the route like it's supposed to be run, and did catch it. So that was just kind of a funny thing that happened at practice earlier today. I would say outside of that, I mean, Drake London continues to be extremely just active. Like, he's always a guy, like, when the first team offense is out, you're kind of looking at him to see like how and when he's going to get the ball. Penix obviously has a great rapport with him at this point, and that's really exciting, I think, considering what we were talking about earlier. Penix did not have a rapport with Drake London at all heading it when he took over as the starting quarterback with those last 3 games of the season. I think it's important to drive that point home when analysts and pundits talk about the inaccuracies that Penix had, or like the miscommunication that he had with some of his receivers. I mean, the guy had not thrown to Drake London or Darnell Mooney until the Wednesday practice of that game against the Giants in, what would that have been, week 16 it was. So to have no experience with those guys running routes, and then to be able to do what Michael Penix was doing, I think that's what gives me a lot of not that I needed like extra like hope or optimism about him, but I think it's worth remembering that he did not have that, and he's getting obviously a lot of that here in this training camp. Another one of the receivers he's going to be looking out for, not a receiver necessarily, but he is a pass catcher, is Kyle Pitts, or maybe he is a receiver. He has been doing some of the receiving drills in individual, but no, he's a tight end. He's a tight end. But he might be split out a little bit more as a receiver this year. And you may have seen this clip as well, but Michael Penix connects with him in the corner in a red zone drill. Penix also had a really, really accurate throw to Drake London for a touchdown with D. Alford kind of draped all over him. But it was really nice to see Penix kind of use Drake London's frame and kind of get it out away from Alford, where only London can catch it, and he just easily snagged it and then crossed the ball over the line. But this throw to Penix, or this throw to Pitts, I want to talk about. It's obviously kind of got social media doing the thing about like, I won't fall for it with Kyle Pitts and fantasy, et cetera, et cetera. And, it was a nice catch by Kyle Pitts, kind of coming down with his feet in the back corner of the end zone. But I thought the more important takeaway from that particular throw was the throw. It was Penix layering the ball over the corner. Penix talked about the throw after practice, saying that it was basically a cover 2 look, like he called it a red 2, which is like a red zone version of cover 2, with that corner kind of squatting on the flat on the goal line, and Penix having to kind of, I wouldn't say lob it, but just layer that ball over. It was Lamar Jackson, who's one of the bigger corners that's in that cornerback room right now. I think he's listed at like 6'3" or something, and he certainly leaped up for it. And that ball was that far over the tips of Lamar Jackson's fingers. And that's what you want to see from Michael Penix. I mean, that's the kind of touch that we described. That was kind of the interception, the one interception that Penix has thrown so far in this training camp, was one of those balls to the, supposedly to the back corner of the end zone, but it was poorly thrown. And we saw him just kind of like not have that touch in, especially that game against the Commanders. comes to mind for me as one of those where he was just missing some guys, where he could have had some big plays and some touchdowns potentially. So nice to see Penix making that throw. And while we're talking about this, like guys, Penix making throws and some of these team sessions, I want to credit Will McFadden, who kind of pointed this out, and I think Dave Archer from Atlanta Falcons also has noted it on some of the Falcons podcasts that they're doing over there. That the team is really not running any 7-on-7 or group. Like typically, you'd call like practice portions of practice like individual, which is obviously your your one-on-one group or your one-on-one like position drills, and then you've got group, which is like passing 7-on-7, your receivers, tight ends, and quarterbacks, and then your offensive linemen and backs and tight ends usually go together. That's like their 7-on-7, where they do some nasty work in the big hog mollies up there. That 7-on-7. It's not the passing skeleton 7-on-7, but that's all what I would consider group play. And then you've got team, and they haven't done any of the 7-on-7, none of the group. And Raheem Morris, I asked him about it today why they haven't, and he straight up said it was basically him. It was like, I don't like it. I don't like 7-on-7. I like team. I like, if we're gonna work on if our quarterback is going to be going through his progressions, I want him doing that with the feeling of the pocket around him, because that's how it's going to be in a game. You're not going to be sitting there in a game just kind of freely open and not just like worrying about getting sacked or anything, because obviously these guys aren't getting sacked in practice, but it's also, I think, the visualization of what you're looking at is going to be totally different when you don't have an offensive line in front of you at all, which is never obviously going to be the case in a real game. So even just having linemen there in front of you that you have to, understand are going to be part of your visual picture as you're going through this progression, I think that's kind of what Raheem Morris is talking about. But he also said it's not just the quarterback. It's, he prefers team 11-on-11 for most players, basically. Like I think for pretty much everyone, I think 11-on-11 is going to be more valuable, except maybe the offensive line and backs, like especially when they're working on some run stuff. And so for that reason, he did say that we will start to see some group start to happen. And that's just because like you don't want to be, if you're just working on your inside zone and your duo, you really don't want to be wasting like the time of the corners and the safeties and the receivers. Like, yes, they need to block and everything, and the defensive backs will need to come up and run support and tackle, but you don't need to be like taking up their time in practice. They can be doing more valuable things. So they will ultimately do some 7-on-7 stuff, but so far we haven't seen it. And personally, I like the approach. I think that it makes total sense, and I think a lot of fans will kind of take Raheem Morris's side on that as well. And he admitted, he was like, yeah, like I don't care for it at all. If it were up to me, we wouldn't ever do it. But some coaches that have different responsibilities, they will want it for their own reasons, for what they're trying to work on with their guys. And he didn't single anybody out, but I do think that it is more for the linemen and the run game, especially like the interior run game. Another practice item, James Pierce Jr. got into a little scuffle again. I say a little scuffle. I actually did not see this one happen. I take the word of Maria Martin, who I was retweeting, who was witness to it earlier today. I just happened to just step inside. Like sometimes at practice, you go inside to go to the bathroom or get a bottle of water or do whatever. And that's what I was doing. And missed, of course, the fight, which is funny because I missed the fights that happened. Both happened on one other practice, which was the one Falcons practice of training camp that I was already kind of pre-planning to miss for a personal conflict. So funnily enough, I have not been witness to any of these James Pierce Jr. fights. And I've been like telling you guys, I'm like, James Pierce Jr. has been nothing but, a gentleman to us. Like when we've talked to him, that is true. But, he's clearly not so much of a gentleman all the time when he's on the field. And I think, when I hear from Falcons fans and talk to them, I think that they appreciate the fact that they're not all gentlemen out there, that you do have some players who are just nasty mofos who just want, who are going to be a little naughty, let's say. And, listen, I'm not worried about it still. I'm not also discounting that it couldn't be a problem. It just all depends on how his teammates take it and whether his teammates can kind of put up with some of this stuff and live with it and not let that spill over into something more that becomes like a personal feud or bad blood like between guys in the locker room. Like as long as that doesn't happen, then I think it's okay. But I do want to say again, I think I've said this on the podcast, but you know, you see my high school football helmet there behind me. Like I played football in high school. I'm not trying to compare myself to these guys, but there is the same feeling that you have when tempers do flare during a practice. I think everybody, whether you're a pro or playing in high school, you get that same kind of like fight or flight mentality. And I remember being in a situation before in high school where like, you know, play happened and a teammate was pissed about, I think, a hit, and he grabbed my face mask and started like tugging it around. And that's where it's like, for me, it's like you feel very helpless in that situation when someone just has a grab of your face and they're able to just pull your head around. And so it's fight or flight, but your helmet's attached to your head. And so all you can really like, I remember for at least for me, and I'm not necessarily like a fighter, I'm more of a lover than a fighter, but like in that moment, it's like you got to fight back. Like you got to get that person's hands off of your head in whatever fashion possible. And so, and yeah, and you get pissed. Like I remember getting pissed at the guy who did that to me. Frankly, it was because like I think it was because he thought like I hit him too hard or something in practice. And maybe that's the way that some of James Pierce Jr.'s teammates feel like he's going too hard. You know, today, for example, and I think actually all three of these fights have happened when the team has just been in helmets, no pads. And I wonder if that is like kind of playing into maybe some perceived like over aggression from him. We did talk to Jake Matthews after practice about it, and he said that it's, you know, they're all a case by case basis based on kind of who it, you know, starts with, you know, the players involved, and obviously there's like some different action that's typically happening. I will say this, and again, this is on Maria's account because I didn't see it, but Raheem Moore's not happy with James Pierce Jr. here. Was apparently like got in his face, was really yelling at him. Was not happy with the situation that he, James Pierce Jr., I'm talking about, allowed this to kind of happen again. I think that Raheem Morris understands that this is part of the player's character, but ultimately you don't want this thing to keep happening. And that's what I said about it initially after the initial two scuffles. I was saying that, you know, it's fine that they happened. The players are cool with it. They seem to have moved on. You don't want this to become a recurring thing. It has now recurred once. Still not the end of the world. I'm not saying I'm like super concerned about it at this point, but you know, you don't want to see it happening on a regular basis. Let's hope it doesn't. I think it was Tyrone Wheatley Jr. was the player that it happened with. That was the player that James Pierce kind of got into it with. I believe that would have been during a developmental period as well at the end of practice. So worth noting that happened. Lastly, last practice note is an update on the kicking competition. And I believe the last episode that we did, we talked about the kicking competition. And the take from myself is basically that Lenny Craig can't win this competition, but Younghoe Koo can lose it. Younghoe Koo has been through the, you know, the grind or the tension, everything that you have to kind of have about you mentally to be an NFL kicker. Younghoe Koo has shown that he has it in the past, despite the fact that he didn't have a good year last year at all. And he's the first to always say, you know, don't sugarcoat it. He doesn't even like it when reporters are like kind of touching around. He's like, no, I was terrible last year, worst year of my career. Let's put that on the table. It is what it is. But he's also, I think, has full confidence that he can return from that. And that injuries, I think, did play a part in those struggles that he was having. And Lenny Craig just hasn't been in that, you know, that furnace, you know. At some point he will, I'm sure. Like Lenny Craig seems very well lined up to ultimately be the kicker for this team at some point, and he certainly has an NFL leg in terms of the power. But for that reason, I think Younghoe Koo is going to have a leg up on Lenny Craig. No pun intended. So the update on the kicking situation Friday, they both happened to kick after we talked about this on the last show. Younghoe Koo went 5 for 5 in those kicks on Friday, and Lenny Craig went 3 for 5. I will note Lenny Craig, like the ones he made, the 55-yarder and the 50-yarder in that practice, I think he missed from like 47 and 43, and it was actually, I think, similar today. I didn't have the distances of where they were kicking today because I was standing right behind the goalposts, but I believe it was still more the intermediate kick that Lenny Craig missed today. The stats from today were Younghoe Koo was 4 for 4 in the rain and the wind, and Lenny Craig was 3 for 4. Like I said, missing one. I would note a couple. I wanted to stand behind the goalpost because I wanted to see that ball coming in to just see what it looked like subjectively to kind of give you guys some more context to it. And Koo's were all perfect, like ball spinning end over end with the proper kind of what I would like refer to as like the speed of the revolutions of the ball or proper. You can tell when someone miskicks it when the ball starts spinning way too fast, even if it is end over end. If the ball's like spinning too fast, it probably doesn't have a lot of power on it or as much power as it should. Similarly, sometimes they kick too much in the middle of the ball and it starts knuckling, and that's what happened with a couple of Lenny Craig's kicks. The ball was kind of like coming in with like a sideways axis, like it was kind of tilted off to the side, kind of ugly. Still coming in with quite a bit of velocity, but obviously missed the one. I was going to say, I don't even know if I actually got around to mentioning it. Lenny Craig, when he was kicking on Friday from 55 yards, the ball was crossing the crossbar at the tip of the goalposts, and the 50-yarder, it was over top of the tips of the goalposts. So the guy has an incredible leg. Someone asked me, so you're telling me that Lenny Craig could make it from 60, at the end of a game? Whether he makes that kick or not, I don't know, but he could kick it way longer. He could kick a field goal longer than 60 yards. I mean, you could probably give him an attempt from 70, honestly. And I would love to see it. I want to see, that's what I want to see, just for fun. I want to see these guys like see how far they can go. Did talk to Koo about this when I kind of put some stuff on Twitter last year. I talked to Younghoe Koo a little bit in the locker room about his techniques and stuff, and he basically said that he does, like, with his technique that he uses, he does sacrifice a little bit of power in order to have, supposedly more consistency, which he ultimately then did not have after we talked. But that was, again, I think largely down to the injury issues that he was suffering through. He said he basically is like, I want to make sure I can kick it 60 yards, basically. I can pretty comfortably kick it 60. I don't feel like I need to kind of be extended further out than that. So that's Younghoe Koo's approach. Lenny Craig can go a little bit further. But having said that, not that I expect too many people to know this, but I know some of you do. Lenny Craig is an international development player. So if Younghoe Koo wins the job, Lenny Craig does not get cut. If Lenny Craig is this team's kicker, it makes little sense to keep Younghoe Koo in the roster because he's still then hitting, salary cap with the money that he's making, as well as taking up one of those roster spots. Where another reason why I think Younghoe Koo will clearly go into the season as the team starting kicker, which is that if Younghoe Koo keeps the job, Lenny Craig sticks around, and he doesn't count against the practice squad numbers. Even as part of the international developmental player spot, every team gets one. It doesn't count against the roster whatsoever. So basically a free player, and that's why it makes total sense. I think it was a really smart move by the Falcons to use this particular slot on a player who really can meaningfully impact the team. Previously, they'd used it on some like defensive ends and such. OCU Minoro was kind of helping them scout out, like I think in Africa for like some of these guys. I think that's where the previous one was before Lenny Craig. But I think it's ultimately what they've worked out here with that international developmental player spot is really smart. But like I said, I expect Koo to go into the season as the kicker, and as long as he doesn't capitulate like he did last year, I would expect him to hold on to that job. So that's going to be it for today. It for us today. Again, a lot to get through. We didn't touch on Micah Parsons. Kind of just like, honestly, I feel like it's like clickbait to even like kind of talk about it, because it's just like it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen from the Falcons. Falcons don't have a first-round pick next year. Like you think the Cowboys are going to trade away Micah Parsons and then not get a first-round pick in next year's draft? You'd have to be insane. Like, I think I saw the ones that were going around. It's like, oh yeah, but they'll give him the next two next two first-round picks. Like, yeah, I'm sorry, that's just a non-starter. And then you're going to give away also. You're going to give like Tyler Algier and Kyle Pitts and a bunch of players who are going to hit free agency next year. That's not going to happen. Many other teams, frankly, like the reason this isn't going to happen for the Falcons, even if they wanted Micah Parsons, one, I don't think ultimately he will get traded. But if he did, just other teams are going to have more to offer the Cowboys. There's going to be better packages that can be put together for him that the Cowboys are going to want to take. So that's it. That's basically it. So yeah, okay. So we did get a Parsons rant in. Okay, good. All right. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow to talk about what surely will be, I have no doubt, well, another exciting practice for the Atlanta Falcons. Until then, talk to you later.